Welcome to the Successful Nonprofits Podcast. I'm your host, Dolph Goldenberg. And friends, today is a very special mailbag episode. Our mailbag episodes are, frankly, among my very favorite, and I am thrilled to be joined in this episode with my colleague, Lexie Linger. Hey, Lexie.
Hey, Dolph. I'm excited to be here today.
Well, that's awesome. I'm hoping you could share with our friends a little bit about what a mailbag episode is. I think it's been, I don't know how long, probably years since we've done one.
It has been. So we get questions all the time. We get them emailed. We get folks that call and ask us questions. We get folks that fill out our online forms. And then also, just even conversations with our clients. We get a lot of questions, and we save these questions up for these very special episodes because we figure if one person's having these questions, there's probably a lot of other nonprofits out there with the same questions.
And if I can just say, we do a lot with those questions. So people send us questions sometimes, especially if it's a question we get a lot. We're like, oh yeah, we should write a blog post on this. So, you or I might sit down and bang out a 3 or 4 paragraph email to someone. And then in a week or two later, we'll go, yeah, now let's turn that into a blog post. Or, sometimes we're like, yeah, we should go recruit podcast guests that can help speak to this question. So my friends, we always love your questions. One of the things you'll see in this mailbag episode is we're going to handle these in a very respectful, anonymous way. We're not going to say names of organizations. We're not going to say people's names, etc. But when you send us questions, we find many ways to try to answer those questions.
Definitely. And so today we're going to share our answers to some of the really common questions we get.
Okay. What question are we going to start with, Lexie?
All right, Daw. I have a stack for you.
Okay.
So my first question, what first step do you recommend when helping a nonprofit energize their board around fundraising?
So this is going to sound tried because it is also true. And so the very first step is everybody has to make a personal gift. Like literally, that is the very first step. A board member can't legitimately go out and ask for money for an organization they're not giving to as well. And one of the things that I always talk about is that personal gift has to be a significant gift. And when we're doing board training, sometimes a board member will push and ask, well, what does that mean, significant? Isn't that really subjective? And I'm very clear, it is quite subjective. As I think about significant, if I'm giving to a lot of charities, 10 or 12 charities, then if I'm on the board of an organization, they should be in my top 3. So, maybe I'm fulfilling a pledge to the place where I went to school. Maybe I'm also very involved in a community of faith, which I don't happen to be. But, those might be ranked 1 and 2. But gosh, the organization that I'm on the board with better be ranked 3. And if I'm only giving to 2 or 3 organizations, significant means that if I'm a board member, I need to be giving more to that one organization than to anybody else. So I do think that's the first step. The second step, this is the tough part for a lot of organizations, especially small ones, is to find ways that you as an organization are already raising money and fold your board members in, engage your board members in raising money in ways that you're already doing it. So for example, if you've got a fun run, then, get a couple of your board members to challenge every board member to recruit 10 runners or to solicit sponsors. If you're doing an annual campaign, then, encourage every board member to send personal postcards to individuals who they know and ask them to give. Or even better, when your annual campaign is over, ask board members to solicit lapsed donors. So the reason I want you to fold board fundraising into fundraising that you're already doing is that it becomes no extra work for you. Literally, all you have to do is say to the board members, who can do X? Oh, great. You can call lapsed donors. How many lapsed donors would you like to call? 4, 5, or 6. And then all you've got to do is give them those lapsed donor cards. And let's face it, in that situation, hopefully you're already going out to those donors who it's been 13, 14, 15 months since they've given to you. And so now instead of you having to do that extra work of picking up the phone and calling them or sending them a postcard, you're going to give those donor cards to board members. So if I were thinking about how to get my board engaged in fundraising, really kickstart them, or better yet, kick them in the tuchus and get them to do some fundraising, that's how I would do it. There's one final thing that I also need to say about this. And my friends, this is unscripted. So this is also why I'm like, yeah, wait, there's one other thing. Board leadership has to be fully supportive of this. So your board chair, your vice chair, your secretary, and your treasurer, they have to go first. They have to make those first gifts, those first personal gifts, and then ask everybody else to do it. They have to, as an example, call lapsed donors and then say, hey, we've done this. It was actually a pretty easy thing to do. And we had a good time talking to donors. Can we get a commitment that everybody is going to do this? And you're probably not going to get that commitment from every board member. But then for your board leadership to say, okay, what commitment can we get from every board member to be engaged in fundraising? What are people willing to do? So I think it starts there.
Can I reflect on a couple of things you said too, Dolph?
Of course.
When you were talking about folding in activities that the organization's already doing, there's two other things that really happen when you do that. One, you're coming in and making a really clear, direct ask. And I think that's really helpful for board members because I hear a lot that board members are ready to help. They just don't know how to help. So if you can be very direct and this is what I need from you, this is how it's going to help us, I think a lot of board members are ready to hop in and do that. The other thing is that I think when it's tied into something the organization is already doing or getting ready to do, it's really important to give advance notice. So for example, if you're like, oh, tomorrow is our campaign, you're probably not going to get a lot of board members to hop in and do that, but they really need that advance notice. So as you're planning for it, go ahead and let your board members know that it's coming up so they can be planning for it too.
Lexie, I am glad you said that. And the funny thing is it made me think of one more thing. And I guess this would go under the headline, be careful what you wish for. Because you're going to get your board engaged in fundraising and your board is going to come back and say, hey, we think our fundraising could be more effective if. And you need to listen to that. It doesn't mean you 100% have to do it, but you need to listen. And if it makes sense, you need to do it. And if it doesn't, you need to engage in a conversation that isn't just, no, we're not going to do that. Or, well, we tried that and it didn't work. You really need to engage in a conversation. And, Lexie, one of the situations I was just thinking about, right now we're running a lot of board recruitment projects. And as part of that, we do onboarding and we ask every board member to solicit their first gift. And I don't know if you saw, but in our email this morning, we have an email from a prospective board member that's going through the onboarding process who said, I solicited my first gift and here was this major hurdle in the online platform. And we just need to figure that hurdle out. That's what makes me think, yeah, that's great. Let's get board members engaged in fundraising, but then we're going to have to be open to their feedback. And, I think you and we're going to have a conversation probably later today. We're going to have to take that back to the organization's executive director and say, yeah, this does maybe seem to be a barrier that might actually turn some people off and make them decide not to give.
Absolutely.
All right. Anything else on this question? Are we ready to move to the next?
I'm ready if you are.
Okay.
All right. Our next question. I recently lost my job. How do I transition careers and get hired again?
Such a phenomenally good question. And Lexie, I know you were in a position once where you got laid off.
Yes, I was.
And I'd be willing to bet that felt like a really traumatic experience at the time.
It was. I also had the additional challenge of being 8 months pregnant. And so it was, it was a very interesting time in my life and a lot of identity changes. That was very hard for me to go from a core part of my identity being someone who worked to not having a job. And then, at the same time, shifting from just a human being to now a parent. So yeah, it was tough. I certainly struggled with that a lot and trying to figure out what my next steps were and not just, oh, I need another job, but how do I find another job while I have an infant or that is going to fit my infant's needs? And it certainly changed what I was looking for. Like suddenly I needed jobs that paid more or had more flexible schedules. And I did a lot of considering of switching career tracks and going from nonprofit work into teaching, for example, because I thought, oh, well, then at least I'll be on a school schedule. So can definitely relate to that. But I think you had some perhaps questions to send us down a particular path or direction.
In part, because I really was hoping you would share that story. So thank you. And one of the things I heard you say, and I think that's so really important, is you took a moment and you paused. You weren't immediately, and of course, I mean, I also understand being 8 months pregnant also makes you think, yeah, I'm not ready to immediately launch a job search, but you were not like, okay, I'm immediately going to launch my job search. You took that moment, you paused and you asked yourself, hey, what do I want to do next? What makes sense? But you also asked yourself some other critical questions. I heard you say, hey, what kind of flexibility do I need? How much do I need to make? Those are questions so often when we think I need to find a job, we aren't thinking what's going to be meaningful, how much do I need to make, and what level of flexibility do I want? And then go find the job that checks all of those boxes, or find the career that checks all of those boxes. There are some careers, like, for example, teaching, you've got a lot of flexibility in the month of July, but you don't have a lot of flexibility 8 or 9 months out of the year. You just don't.
Right. The other thing, when I read this, how do you transition careers? Does that from program work to development work? Is that from nonprofit to for-profit? That can mean a lot of things. But when I'm thinking about a transition like that and a transition in your career, another important factor is, what skill sets do I have that are applicable to this other career? And what am I going to need to go work on? And do I need to go back to school? Do I need to go do some trainings? Do I need to do some volunteer work or something to build up my resume? And that's something I thought a lot about too. And what did I have the capacity for to help me get whatever skill set I needed for the next step?
Yeah. And I will also say, I think a big part of that, because what I heard you talk about is networking, training, et cetera, is developing your story. Because everybody's going to ask when you're networking, oh, I'm looking for work. What are you looking for? What they're really asking is, hey, tell me your story. Not just, oh, I'm looking to get into development, or I'm looking to get into teaching, or I'm really interested in corporate marketing. Like, what's your story? What you think about that hero's journey, right? Every time I see anything that's produced by corporate marketing, I'm just so intrigued by it. And so I went on this journey to figure out how I could do this. And I took these training classes. I did an internship. And then after that, I realized it is time for me to use all of these other skills that I learned in the nonprofit sector. So I do think it's that being able to tell your story as well and really show why this is the next logical step in your career.
Definitely.
The last thing I do have to say, though, and I think this is true whether someone is laid off or fired, is I think also being really self-reflective and self-aware and upfront and honest with those prospective employers. That's especially true if you were fired. Because I do interims and because I was a permanent executive director, over the course of my life, I've interviewed, probably a couple hundred, maybe more people. And those individuals who walk in and say, yeah, I was fired from my last job, but they were all dopes. They were idiots. I did nothing wrong. They were all wrong. Even if that's the case, we all have something we can learn from an experience. And, hey, what did you learn from that experience? How will you use that to be a better professional, to be a better colleague in the future? And I think it's really critical, if you have been terminated from a position, to be self-aware, self-reflective, and work that into your story and really show that you are self-aware and you really have thought about this and you're changing things so that going forward, you will be even more successful.
That's a good point. I also just want to say, job hunting is awful. It's a terrible feeling. And especially if you've been let go or you've been fired, it is demoralizing. And so, just it can take a while to find the right job and you can feel really bad while you're doing it, but stick with it, persevere, and you'll find what you're looking for and what you need eventually, and it'll work out.
And let me say, Lexie, you're a whole person in your own right, and that's 100% your perspective, and that perspective is valued and is valuable. But job hunting isn't demoralizing for everybody, and it doesn't have to be hard. I also know that I come from a place of a lot of privilege, but traditionally, I've always loved job hunting. I know, Lexie, you're shaking your head. No, I have always loved job hunting. I love the interview process. Everything about that I like. This is the only time in your life when it is socially acceptable to humbly brag about yourself. You can't walk in and go, I'm the best thing since sliced bread, but you can walk right up to that line. You really kind of, as long as you're doing it in a way that's humble, this is the time when, you're supposed to really highlight your skills, highlight your accomplishments, talk about the ways that you've changed organizations, departments, lives. And I say organizations, departments, or lives, because if you're a leader of an organization, you might not directly touch that many lives, but you're changing organizations. If you're a direct contributor, you might not change an organization, but you might have touched a lot of lives. And all of that could apply to the next step in your career. So if you're an organizational contributor who's changed individual lives, seeking to become a manager, you're going to talk about how you're going to use those skills as a manager. But so it is interesting because like I've always really loved the ability to go into interviews and talk about like all the amazing things that I've done in a way that if I did them anywhere else, if I did them at a cocktail party, people would roll their eyes. What a bore. How horrible.
I love that perspective. It's been unfortunate that I have job hunted every time our economy has taken a dip or worse. And so for me, it has always been a demoralizing experience, except for this job.
That's kind of you to say, Lexie. Thank you. And I'll say like I've job hunted in good economies and I've job hunted in bad economies. I will also say my first few was really scary. Like, and when I say first, I mean first few out of college. Like, like everybody, I mean, I've worked in grocery stores. I once, while in college, got a very low level position at the IRS, essentially opening envelopes and sorting tax forms. Like literally, that was a job. I'd spend 12 hours a day. I worked 12 3-hour shifts. Sorry, 3 12-hour shifts. I'd spend 12 hours a day slitting open envelopes and then sorting 1040, 1040 EZ, 1120, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, quality control people would walk around, and I'll say that was really just taking a civil service exam, so that was not that scary. But everything other than that, well into probably like after my very first job out of college, all of that was really scary. I remember going into my first job interview out of college feeling completely underprepared, and in my mind's eye, when I look at that, I was I'm a very small adult human being. So I'm the size of a child, essentially. I'm the size of a teenager. Lexie, you see me in person, you know that. And so in my mind's eye, like I can picture myself, I'm in men's clothes, which means I'm look like I'm playing in one of my parents' clothes. Like I'm in clothes that are 2 sizes too big for me. I'm in a tie that I don't know how to tie that well. My shoes are probably terrible. I'm sitting in some executive director's office and he's like, so what are you going to do to generate more money for us? And I was like, I don't know. I guess I'm going to write grants. And literally, that was a terrible answer. I could have come up with such better answers. But so I do remember really being kind of scared and feeling, frankly, a lot of anxiety and fear about it. But ever since getting that first job, and by the way, bizarrely enough, that executive director hired me. I did not interview well. But since getting that job, I've always been like, oh yeah, now I've got some accomplishments under my belt and I can go in and talk about those accomplishments and how I want to leverage those to do something even better.
Yeah, I think it definitely gets easier as you have more and more experience. And especially like you were saying earlier, even if you have been let go or you've been fired, being able to take those experiences and really craft a good story about them and how you can use them to grow and really fit the needs of this next position.
Let me also just say one final thing. Take every interview you can get. Even if you're not interested, it's practice. And it helps you get over that hurdle of, oh, I'm nervous about it. And my friends, if you're listening to this and you're like, none of this question applies to me because I currently have a job, it's not a crime to look. And it's not a crime to take interviews. And it's always okay to say no. It is, no one thinks the worst for you. Now, let me say, if you get to a final interview and you're negotiating salary and then you say, no, I decided to stay where I am. Yeah, they might think the worst. But if you just go out on an interview and they say, hey, we're interested in a second, it's okay for you to say no. Or if you go out on a second interview and they say, hey, we're interested in hiring you and you say no, that's fine. But it's really good experience and it will expand your network.
Awesome. You ready for the next one?
I am. Let's go.
This is a question we actually get a lot. And I'm going to preface by saying one of the things that I love about our job, Dolph, is that we get to work with organizations at all different points in the nonprofit life cycle. So this is from a very early on nonprofit, a young nonprofit. We need support in obtaining a 501c3 and advice just for networking and getting the organization's name out there.
We do get that question a lot, Lexie. And, I also feel like I say all the time, gosh, we really don't work with organizations that have not even filed their 501c3 documents yet. And it's rare for us to work with an organization that's really new. I mean, typically they've been around at least a few years before they hire us. And I actually remember that question. I think it came through in my email. My response, of course, was first off, hey, just so you know, this is really not work we do, but let me see if I can't point you in the right direction. So I think some places to look and see if there's a nonprofit resource center in your town or in your state. The vast majority of states do have a statewide nonprofit resource center, and they probably have a starter kit. You could also look and see if there's an association for the type of organization you're starting. And if there is, they potentially also may have a starter kit or a membership coordinator who could talk to you about, really how you incorporate your 501c3 and recruit your initial board, et cetera. And then the last thing, there's a lot of legal items that have to be checked off when you're starting a nonprofit. You have to fill out a form with the IRS. But before you do that, you have to incorporate in your state. You have to have an articles of incorporation, bylaws. You have to have a board, et cetera. And so it is also a really good idea to find a pro bono attorney. And let me say, that's not my friend Ned, who's a real estate attorney. That's a pro bono attorney who really specializes in corporate law and can help you jump through some of those hoops. Lexie, you got anything to add?
I just wanted to clarify the pro bono attorney. I know we have some conversations with folks sometimes that are like, oh, well, the university down the street has a legal clinic. Is that an okay place to get a pro bono attorney? And I know you have some thoughts, so just wanted to toss that one out to you.
I do. And it might be an okay place to reach out to them and say, hey, this is the type of pro bono assistance we need. Is this something that your law students can help us with? Because let me also be clear, a legal clinic at a law school is probably going to be law students under the supervision of some attorneys, but it's probably going to be law students. And they'll tell you yes or no. Chances are, like, a legal clinic at a law school probably won't be what you're looking for. What you really need is a pro bono attorney who probably is working in private practice, might be working at one of the big firms. I think that there are many ways to find a good pro bono attorney. One is to see if there's a pro bono partnership network in your town. A lot of towns have them. And there's also a national pro bono network that we can link to in the show notes, which might have been what you were getting at as well, Lexie, I don't know. But we could link to that in the show notes so you can look and see if there's a pro bono partnership somewhere near you.
Any thoughts on the second half, the networking and getting the name out there?
Oh, so that's a tough one, in part because I don't know what part of the nonprofit sector you're in, and where you're going to network is really going to depend on what your mission is and what your services are going to be. But what I would think about is recruiting your initial board, and recruiting a board with the idea and concept that you want a board that can get your name out there, and you want a board that can help you in networking. And that means not people who are just your friends and family, because they're going to share a very similar network as yours. You want a diversity of skills, of lived experiences, of connections.
That's actually a really good lead into our next question, Dolph, if you're ready for it.
It is, and I think this might be our last, because I think we're probably coming up on time. And I know you and I talked about this. We said we're not going to do an off the map question. So instead, my friends, instead of off the map, we probably have time for one more question.
So this is from a listener of the podcast, actually, who is also just founding their nonprofit. And they reached out asking for some guidance. And I think you had to ask a clarifying question, because we get that question a lot, tell us everything. Well, that's a lot. So,
well, and real quick, whenever someone sends us that, tell us everything, I just want to respond 42. I just want to hit reply 42. All the best, Dolph.
Dolph, are you going to explain to us what that means?
I have a feeling that I have friends who are listening who know what it means, but I bet some probably don't as well. And so there's a great 4-book trilogy called Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and it turns out that the secret to life, the universe, and everything is 42. So that's how I want to respond. But you probably had to be a nerd in high school in the 1980s to really fully appreciate that joke.
It took me a second, but I do remember that. I wasn't a nerd in high school in the 80s, but.
Well, I have a feeling you weren't a nerd in high school, period. Yeah, so that's probably a joke you got from someone else. Maybe your beloved husband, who is a person in his own right.
Okay, back on topic, Dolph. So you had to ask some clarifying questions on what kind of guidance this person was looking for. And their response is, I'm most interested in learning how to ensure that I am building a board that is going to be reliable. For example, what board expectations should I have in place? And how do I determine what each person is bringing to the table and making sure I have the right people at the table?
So how am I going to build a board that is reliable and what expectations I have in place? So the first thing I think is for you to think through what expectations you want. At a minimum, as we've already talked about, every board member needs to make a personal gift. If I were in your shoes starting up an organization, I would require that they make a personal gift before they join your board. They also need to commit to fundraising. You need to decide what that looks like. Does that mean specific activities? Like, for example, you will participate in our annual campaign by soliciting lapsed donors. Or does that mean a specific amount? Like, you will fundraise $500 a year, $1,000, $2,500, something like that. And then the last is that volunteer participation on the board. It's some expectation about the percentage of meetings you're going to attend. I know, Lexie, you and I often see board stats, in part because we ask for them. We often see board stats, and those board members that are missing half of the meetings, they can't be a good board member. Like, even if they're giving 100,000, they can't. You look like you want to jump in.
Well, I was going to say that for the most part, the board members that don't attend meetings also really aren't supporting making a personal contribution and supporting fundraising. Not always, but pretty frequently. If they're not doing one, they're not doing the other either. And that board meeting attendance is really, really important for having that engaged board, but also having an informed board that can lead the organization well. So I'm right there with you on the attendance, Dolph.
And I'll also share with you one of the things that I'll often hear is, and I call it the celebrity question. It depends on the celebrity in your town. And so, it could be, well, if Bernie Marcus, founder of Home Depot, wanted to serve on our board, give us $1 million a year, but never attend a board meeting, what will we say? Or if Oprah Winfrey wanted to serve on our board, give us $3 million a year, but never attend a meeting, that means they couldn't. My first response to that is always, well, do either of those people want to serve on your board right now? Okay, then it's completely theoretical. But my second response is, chances are, if they don't want to attend meetings, they don't actually want to be on your board. They want some level of recognition. Figure out what that recognition is going to be, right? But so they want some level of recognition. They don't want to feel guilty about being a bad board member. But so definitely also set those expectations around meeting attendance and committee participation. And then communicate that really clearly with people that you talk to. As I already mentioned, really break out of your friends and family network. Really dive deep. That means reaching out to people and saying, hey, can you recommend people? You're already in my network. I'm looking for people that are outside of my network. Who could you recommend? This is what our mission is going to be. These are what our expectations are. And then, from that shampoo commercial from the 1980s, they tell their friends, and you get connected and you get connected and you get connected until you find the right board members.
And I think, Dolph, that's the second half of the question is, how do you determine what skill set each person's bringing? But I think part of that question really also gets to, how do I figure out what skill set I'm looking for?
Agreed. And really what you need is, it's almost like a professional Noah's Ark. So, in the ideal world, you want 2 attorneys, you want 2 accountants, you want 2 people with subject matter expertise in whatever it is you're doing. Maybe you're a nonprofit dental clinic. Then guess what? You want 2 people with expertise in running dental clinics, or maybe a professor of dentistry or something like that. You want 2 marketing people. It really is. Think about a Noah's Ark of professional skills and all the skills that you need to govern the organization.
And I think with organizations that are a little more established, they're doing the same thing, but also thinking about any special projects. Are you doing a strategic plan in the next year or 2? You might want to find some folks that have experience with strategic planning. Are you doing a master facilities plan? Do you need to move? Maybe you need some realtors on your board. This is not just for that founding board, but an ongoing thing that all boards should be doing at all times.
Absolutely, and well said. Well, Lexie, I think we promised that would be our last question, so we can kind of try to keep this within time. Normally we like to go between 30 and 35 minutes. So Lexie, I'm so glad we did this mailbag episode today. Thank you for joining us. And let me ask, for folks that want to send us a question, I know there's many ways to do it. What are some of the best ways?
So emailing Lexie at successfulnonprofits.com, or you can email Dolph at successfulnonprofits.com. And you can always check out our website. There's a contact us page where you can fill out your name and your email address and send us your question. We're monitoring all of those things and always happy to be back in touch as soon as we can. I think, as you say, Dolph, we read every email. It might take us a couple of days to get back to you, but we do read and respond to every message we get.
Absolutely. And I think every now and then we do an Ask Dolph Live. And I don't think we, as of the time that we're taping this, which is just a couple of days before I leave for sabbatical, we don't have one scheduled. But I'm sure we'll end up doing one. And, we always let folks know when we're doing an Ask Dolph Live. So you can also join in for an Ask Dolph Live.
Absolutely. Hopefully we'll do one over the winter.
Awesome. Well, my friends, I hope that you have enjoyed this episode. And if we answered a question that you found useful and you're like, oh, Dolph's friend Ned would really like this, send it to my friend Ned. Go ahead and just send it over and, say, hey, there's a great question. You might want to listen to the whole thing. But the second question is one that I think will be really good for you to listen to. We're always happy if you share this episode. And my friends, that is our episode for the week. I hope that you have gained some insight to help you and your nonprofit thrive. And the lawyers always make me do a disclaimer. And before I do that, let me just say, so long and thanks for all the fish. Now, here's the disclaimer. I'm not an accountant, an attorney, nor a hitchhiker going all over the galaxy. What that means is that you should not rely on me for tax, legal, accounting advice, and do not expect that I'm going to be your guide to the galaxy. I have never left the planet Earth. This podcast, it is for informational purposes only. Like, for example, you now know the secret to life, the universe, and everything. 42. But it should not be relied on for tax, legal, or accounting advice. If you were to submit a legal document with just 42 on it, you will lose your case. You will lose your case. Don't do that. So don't rely on me for tax, legal, and accounting advice.